people are mistaking speed for velocity. And I think the difference between the two is that velocity invokes direction. Founders who kind of know where the puck is going can see just around the bend. They see things that other people don't. Venture as being the founder journey, but on antidepressants. The amplitudes are depressed. Your highs aren't as high, your lows aren't as low, but you're still very emotionally, certainly intellectually attached.
Well, KJ, welcome to Venture Grounds. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't we kick things off? Just tell us a little bit more about yourself, about Google Ventures. We'd love to hear just the background.
Yeah, 100%. So my name is KJ Sidberry. I'm a partner at Google Ventures, or GV. We're a multi-stage global institution, a venture capital firm that focuses on championing the most innovative founders looking to create generational companies. Our focus is spread across North America, Europe, Israel. We have a little over 10 billion in assets under management.
Jeez.
We're adding roughly 50 new logos a year,
Wow.
deploying upwards of $1 billion a year into new investments and follow-on.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. That's massive. Okay, let's dig in. If everything becomes vibe coded and hyper personalized, what actually stops consumer software from collapsing into novelty and noise?
That's a good question. For what it's worth, I'm super excited about the idea of vibe coding and the extent to which people are empowered to kind of form their own solutions over time.
Everybody I know and everybody I work with, everyone's making their own stuff.
100%. In fact, little side anecdote, I just vibe coded a website for my girlfriend for her birthday. Hopefully this is released sometime after the birthday, so it could be a surprise. Yeah. But it's just funny what you now have capabilities to do. But I think the funny thing is like, when I look at the landscape broadly speaking, it almost feels like an inversion of like that old adage that says that ideas are cheap and execution's everything. When you have democratized execution, it almost reinforces the idea of ideas and like having a strategic point of view or perspective as to what it is that you want to build. That seems to be making all the difference in the world of consumer AI.
I love it. If apps are generated on demand instead of installed, where does durable value live? The model, the context layer, or the distribution choke point?
Yeah. I think all are important. I think the reminder that I think I have to force myself, as well as some of the founders that I work with, has a lot to say that the capabilities of the models as they exist today are incredible. They're absolutely impressive. So much so that we don't really know what to do with all of it most of the time. And that's for us, who are kind of inundated with newer technologies, up to date on all of the latest innovations. I can't imagine what it feels like for someone whose exposure is not to the level of someone who's deeply wedded to Silicon Valley to a meaningful extent. And so we're at an appropriate inflection point in the S-curve where I think we're nearing the top, but there are definitely a lot of studios and labs that are kind of working to elevate that further and beyond. But I don't think adoption has kept pace. And so in that context, I think things like memory and context and your ability to kind of create durable, long-standing value in the service of your end customer and consumer will probably be more of that first-class challenge to solve during these next few cycles. And so to the extent that you can leverage memory in profound ways that do more than just implement a RAG, where it's like you're kind of like using a computer or like a computer-minded implementation to say that, all right, let's retrieve things from a database and then let's create system level settings for someone to take advantage of a product. I think we need to go something deeper, or somewhere deeper rather, where you're able to kind of understand the nuances of these data points, understand or almost kind of like mime or emulate the human experience that says like, all right, these contextual data points are important, they vary in importance, they may need to surface in different ways. There's a lot more dimensionality to the ways in which you kind of think about data points, memory, and context that I think still feels underdeveloped and underimplemented.
As an investor, how are you like keeping up with that?
Yeah.
At the pace that this is moving, right? Especially in consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it's easy.
Like you're probably trying these things, right? Like yourself.
My phone is absolutely riddled with applications. My computer is constantly yelling at me for like new downloads. My browsers have entirely too many tabs open at any given point in time. It's a lot. And part of that is like obviously super daunting, but part of
Yeah.
it is also super exciting. It means that people are kind of coming to the environment, into the ecosystem with refreshed vigor
Yeah.
and a willingness to explore and an unfounded kind of curiosity that I think stokes a lot of excitement for like what's to come. But yeah, it is a challenge to try to keep tabs and on top of everything, but it's a challenge that I welcome and it's one that I find a lot of excitement in.
Love it. You back categories that look niche until you understand their connective tissue. What's the hardest signal to measure in those markets, and what do most investors still get wrong when they try to size them?
So I think people tend to think of niche as being inherently small, and I'm not sure if that's quite the case. Particularly when you start to gain an appreciation for what it looks like to have a more nuanced understanding of some of these demographics or some of these populations, where you're able to kind of serve them in very unique and particular ways. And the willingness to pay or the types of elevated or enhanced engagement that comes on the heels of that can be really interesting and can certainly buoy what could be a sizable, interesting market from a venture perspective. But I think I wouldn't be the first one to mention this, but I think most folks get market sizing wrong as an exercise. I think
Okay.
the example that people often reference is Uber, right? Like when people were making investments into Uber, I think the assumption was, all right, let's look at the taxi cab market and use that as a proxy for understanding how big this company can be. Uber very quickly surpassed the entirety of that market because one, they were able to expand the market itself. And then two, over time, they earned the right to expand into adjacencies over time, whether that was their food delivery business or these other things. And so market sizing feels like a second, and when I think of the preference tag, it feels like a second layer of consideration behind the quality of the team. Because I feel like really dope teams, candidly, can oftentimes take what can be perceived as a niche or small market and turn it into something pretty meaningful.
Do you have an example? Is there someone that you're thinking of when you say that? That's something that you've seen recently?
I mean, recently would be hard to say just because these things do take time to develop. Even like the Uber story was one that took quite a few years before it became pretty evident that they were doing something that felt an order of magnitude larger than anyone's imaginations. I think having a creativity around this is usually helpful, but these things are super hard to predict. There's oftentimes a retroactive perspective that says like, oh yeah, we knew that this market was going to be that
Yeah,
big,
yeah, yeah,
but that
yeah.
feels a little too self-serving.
Yeah. You say great board members speak less. What's the most common way VCs accidentally break trust with founders, even when they think they're being helpful?
Yeah. I feel like this almost warrant. Yeah, I remember saying that on a panel, I think some years ago. But like, I think this warrants perhaps like a metric, whereas some like signal or quality to word count or something to that effect that people can hold themselves accountable to. Look, I mean, I think the spirit of most people's contributions to board settings is to be helpful. I think the reality, though, is that the ways in which venture capitalists can be the most helpful is a function of two things. One is having deep empathy for the founder experience and wanting to partner and collaborate for some exercise of truth seeking while honoring what their experience is, because being a founder can sometimes be a very lonely journey
Oh, yeah.
and certainly a very stressful one.
Yeah.
I think the second bit is just recognizing that as VCs, we see a lot of shit and we can be able to leverage our collective understanding of how things are translating, how things are materializing in market, all of those things to kind of help deliver what feels like succinct insights that can be leveraged for a particular business. I think the failure point comes in overfitting some of those experiences into the needs of the business in a way that doesn't fully appreciate someone who's in the weeds, right? And
Yeah.
seeing things from a day-to-day perspective. There's the balancing act that needs to be struck in terms of how helpful and how much weight you want to give insight coming from this more top-down perspective, having a survey of what feels like the broader landscape.
Yeah. Can you unpack that a little bit more? So like you're saying like board member maybe steps in, offers some insight, some direction. Maybe they
Yeah.
haven't been there before. It can totally spin things for the founder.
Yeah, I can imagine two worlds. One where a board member does have experience, but
Yeah.
that experience is dated, right? Like potentially you're a board member who at one point in your journey operated a sales function, but the way that things are moving these days, especially now, makes that
Game's
insight
changed.
pretty dated, right? Like it could be helpful and that insight is nonetheless probably appreciated,
We have to be careful.
but its relevance may not necessarily tie one to one to the experience at hand. And then I guess the second bit is saying that like, oh, we've seen that company do that thing, it failed, therefore there's no shot of that attempt being successful under any circumstances. And that may not necessarily be true. Like there are definitely companies that for whatever reason could be the wrong team, the wrong timing, the wrong technology that they had available. All of those kind of dimensions could change pretty reasonably and pretty quickly, such that a similar attempt at some later date with a different cross section of teams and other circumstances could unlock a different outcome.
I like that. You live through multiple cycles and say constraint raises the bar. For founders building right now, what behavior worked in 2021 that is actively being punished in today's market but hasn't fully died yet? Wild time to be in venture.
Most certainly. I think one of the things that was interesting in the context of 2021 was the use of capital as a blunt force instrument. You had a lot of companies raising behemoth rounds that wasn't necessarily a reflection of business viability,
Might I say not unlike today.
but like, right? But like, I think the difference with today is that you do have like what feels like increasingly more sustainable businesses that can actually leverage the capital in productive ways. But I do think that there's a risk of inflating our capital deployment. I think one of the more interesting things, and you mentioned like the notion of constraint. I think constraint is important because I feel like in those environments, humans do incredible things. When your back is truly against the wall, or you just don't have as many options available in front of you, you're kind of forced to kind of really lock in and hone on things that truly demonstrate value and move the needle. I think capital can be reframed in this way, where I think, particularly for earlier stage companies, and I'm excluding kind of like the labs or perhaps model building companies that could benefit from like really strong capex injections into their businesses. I do think that for most companies, particularly across applied AI, these companies are actually more capital efficient than I think we've seen in a very long time.
Totally.
And so there's not necessarily an urgent need for you to absorb so much capital,
Especially in consumer too, right?
especially in consumer.
B2B, totally different story. You need bodies, consumer.
Yeah, I would agree. And so I think there's this idea of like minimally viable capital, which is to say, what is the amount that you need to prove or demonstrate a hypothesis, plus a little bit of buffer per se, that I think is like really helpful for this next chapter, where I don't think that these businesses need to raise, particularly across consumer, particularly across applied AI, need to raise these heaping globs of capital, which I think in some cases can do more harm than good.
What have you seen, like from consumer perspective? What are some things that you see great companies doing?
I
Right?
think
Being super capital efficient in that market.
100%. I think it's almost like a forcing function that says because you're capital efficient, you're not wasting money on things that don't matter, and you're forcing yourself to align your business with what creates value. And so I think we're in an ecosystem or an environment where consumers are incredibly more discerning than I think they have been. And they obviously have optionality, right? Like they can choose one experience over the other, and they have all of the tools available to kind of make informed decisions. They're discerning with their time, and they're certainly discerning with their cash. And so if you're going to be on the other end of a swipe of a credit card, you need to make sure that you're doing something that feels worth it. And so it almost hastens the process for founders to identify, like, what is it that I'm actually contributing to the ecosystem? What is the value that's being delivered? How can I make these consumers' lives better? And your ability to get to that sooner rather than later feels really important here.
Everyone agrees AI is the next platform shift. What's the most crowded, overfunded AI wedge you'd actively avoid right now? And what's the quieter one you think people will wish they'd taken seriously sooner?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm a little bit biased because I focus predominantly on consumer. But I do think there's a lot of noise around the productivity of the enterprise, which makes sense.
Okay.
When you think about where you can identify game-changing developments as a result of AI, there are a few categories that make a ton of sense, particularly in the context of LLMs. There's like customer service,
Back office.
there's law, there's back office. There's a handful of code gen, a handful of categories where you're like, oh, okay, these feel like obvious points for AI to come in and just like reframe or reimagine or rescript the entire landscape. I'm interested in what companies work to improve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which feels less productivity aligned and more about how do you improve the quality of life for a particular individual or cohort of people. And I think one slept on category in the context of all of this continues to be education,
Okay.
which historically has been a little bit of a bad word across most venture circles. It's just like the outcomes haven't necessarily translated super well. Yeah. And so I think the AI kind of creates an opportunity to solve what has been the promise of ed tech for a very long time, which is personalized education at vastly different cost structures. And so like, what does it look like to give or unlock the power of a personal tutor, which historically and by most measures really improves the efficacy of any particular education paradigm, and put that into the hands of more people? Like, how do you democratize bits and pieces of that experience to more people such that you elevate how folks even consider or engage with education?
Yeah.
And I think AI can be a really meaningful unlock in that context.
Yeah, it's huge. Have you been seeing a lot of companies that are building in that space that you're fired up about?
A ton. And what's interesting is that you see them across two categories. There's those that try to implement AI in classroom-like settings, like the magic schools or the school AIs or the Brisks of the world, that do work to support the student, but also support the teacher, who are also technically having a miserable time in some cases, because it's hard being a teacher. And oftentimes you don't
Especially
really have
now, so like with people cheating and using things to do all their work, like how do you balance that?
Yeah, totally. I'm a little sensitive to it because my parents were teachers. And so I've had a firsthand account of the almost altruistic work that teachers are leaning into in service of their students. And then the other category that's really exciting is this notion of like direct to learner, which in many cases kind of supports what feels like intrinsically motivated learning, that feels potentially more elevated than what we've seen from Duolingo, which is kind of like more of a glorified game, but has done a lot to kind of like champion some form of education. It's interesting to now see what companies can up-level that. And so you have companies like BeFreed or OVO.
Oh yeah, I know those guys.
Yeah. Doing incredible work to create platforms that meet students or learners where they deserve to be met, creating new content types and new formats and educational paradigms to support people getting from A to B in whatever their educational journey might be.
Yeah. You talk about synthesis as a core VC skill. What's an example where oversynthesizing caused you or the industry to miss something obvious that a single obsessed founder saw clearly?
Yeah. I think the danger sometimes in being a venture capitalist is that you think you're more right than you are. And I don't know if it's necessarily a criticism of oversynthesis, but it's perhaps a more elevated appreciation for like all of the things that you're likely to see in the market. Just because as a VC, you're seeing upwards of like, I don't know, 1,000, 3,000 deals a year. But I think what's special about founders in particular is that they come to the table with a unique insight that you can prosecute, certainly. But it's that idea, that kernel, that nugget that really can offer potentially a game-changing company. And I think there are a lot of venture capitalists that kind of think of themselves as more thematically oriented or a little bit more opportunistic. I think you should certainly have a prepared mind for how certain categories work and how different markets behave. But I think it's really special when you're able to appreciate when a founder comes to the table with something that teaches you something.
Yeah.
And they come with a unique insight informed by their perspective, their experiences, their challenges, that forces you to kind of rethink what an opportunity could look like.
That's cool. So be open to being surprised
Being open to being surprised.
versus like you're stuck in like, here's what I'm doing. This is exactly the lane I'm in. I like that.
Yeah.
What does winning in consumer AI actually mean right now? Product love, distribution, retention, unit economics, and which one do you think most teams are over optimizing at the expense of a real moat?
I think all of those are important. And I feel like, particularly in consumer AI, there's a lot of conversations around the notion of momentum
Okay.
as like not necessarily a novel moat, but one that has different considerations in the context of AI. You're just able to do more quickly. And the idea is that you can move super quickly in a way that gets you more customers, that allows you to learn more about what their needs are, and then allows you to iterate more quickly, such that with that momentum, if you have two companies that were otherwise neck and neck, you have compounding acceleration for one that's able to develop, cultivate, nurture that momentum. I think the piece of that, and then unfortunately, I think people look at ARR as like a loose or rough proxy for momentum, which I think is important. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's been fascinating to see these companies scale to impressive degrees. I do think though that it misses, in some cases, not in all, just like the quality of that revenue and all of the underlying metrics and KPIs that fall underneath that revenue that are still important. And I think people are very quick to ignore those things, assuming that, compute costs will decrease, or they have more time than they think to create a product that people find sticky, that switching costs will increase over time, such that you can assume that people will want to linger on your product and not necessarily move on to another. But I think people tend to deprioritize those concepts in favor of just quick elevated ARR ramps, and that just feels like a miss in the market today.
How do you track that momentum, right? If you have a company that's like they're breakout velocity, right? They're scaling their users and customers in the sense of consumer, but like, are you looking at like how fast they're shipping product? Like how do you look at something like that? It's like, how do I get in the mind of these customers who are the buyers to understand this business?
Yeah, I mean, every business looks fundamentally different, but I would say that some interesting proxies that I've discovered over time is just trying to qualify the rate of learning.
Okay.
And so that can come in the form of talking to customers. If a customer can say, yo, the product that I experienced a month ago is vastly different than a product that I'm experiencing now, and it feels way more purpose-built for me, that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's something worth clocking. There's obviously product velocity and product speed, like how quickly are they shipping out product, high quality product, not just to have like logs that suggest that you're shipping, but like these are meaningful and substantive updates and evolutions of the product is another kind of heuristic that becomes super helpful. And it's even having conversations with the founder and understanding to what extent do they have humility around the process, and understanding that, oh, the things that I know now are informed by decisions that I made a month ago that I've then reflected on and then was able to enact just as quickly.
Yeah.
And so these are things that you to dig into that all signal some form of rate of learning that says that their ability to iterate and kind of shape whatever experience that they're building around the needs of the customer is only going to become more interesting and more differentiated over time.
Mm-hmm. From where you sit, what's actually happening in AI right now that early stage founders or VCs aren't fully internalizing yet?
It's kind of related to a little bit of the momentum conversation, but I think people are mistaking speed for velocity.
Okay.
And I think the difference between the two is that velocity invokes direction. I think people are really quick to claim speed. Like, we have these ramps, we have this number of customers.
In 6 months.
And whatever insert time frame here.
It's a lot of that.
It's a lot, right? But it doesn't tell me that you have a perspective or a POV as to where the market is heading.
Okay.
especially in an environment where things are shifting. Like the tectonic plates of this marketplace is ever shifting and shifting to degrees that we've never seen before. What I would love to be able to see are founders who kind of know where the puck is going, can see just around the bend so that they know what, like, as they're building product or as they're entering into the marketplace, they see things that other people don't. And that they're moving all of their teams, all of their product, all of that direction into a very specific focus point versus just moving quickly. It's the idea of like running with more direction that just allows you to execute in ways that far surpasses any of your contemporaries or competitors.
That's what you want to see when it comes to velocity. You care less about, hey, we've got 1 million ARR in 6 months. You want to hear how they're getting to that velocity and like, hey, this is all great, but like, here's what's going to change in the next 3 months. Here's what's going to change in the next 6
Precisely.
months. And here's what, like, how we're going to keep up or like beat
Yeah,
that.
and it's a version of just like coming to the table with that unique insight. That says like, yeah, the ramp has been great, but more importantly, we know where the future is headed. And we can kind of charter that destination in a way that allows us to hone in on it and be more competitive in the marketplace.
In this AI cycle, what's the mistake you see early stage teams make that feel small in the moment, but it's impossible to undo later?
I think it's also kind of just mistaking that speed and velocity concept, where I think it's the wrong set of priorities. I think people are favoring some version of lip service that performs well on LinkedIn versus what's performing well underneath the hood. I can't tell you how many companies I've spoken to that from the outside in perspective look like they're dominating.
People have to talk about it.
And then you discover later that the business is not performing nearly as well as they seem to be projecting. And so I think honing in on what feels like true, potent, secure human needs, and then being able to lock in and support that and treat that as your fundamental North Star. It feels like the name of the game.
Why are you most excited about consumer right now?
I think for a very long time, consumer has been kind of like in a weird place.
Yep.
And that's because, as with any platform shift, once you start to tap out the previous one, everything by default and by definition feels inherently incremental. A lot of the services or platforms that we've come to rely on just end up being good enough. And so anything that's new isn't sufficiently differentiated or doesn't present what feels like 100x improvement over those former experiences. And therefore, it's hard for those companies to gain traction. I think with AI, and this might be dating myself, but I think it's like taking an Etch-a-Sketch to the entire landscape and is having an opportunity to redraw, reimagine, rescript what's out there in ways that do deliver on the promise of being an 100x or 1,000x improvement over what existing surfaces have looked like. And so I think of therapy in some contexts, right? Where therapy, if you trace it through the evolutions of our former platform shifts, you had the idea of it being completely analog, totally in person, very frictioned, very expensive. With the open web, you were able to kind of create a marketplace, which was like effectively a digital phone book, but it unlocked access in a way that didn't exist previously, where now you had an opportunity to understand which therapists were available to you that were in network or that had availability or things of that sort. But as technology evolved, so too did your way to be able to serve therapy and who you're able to serve with therapy. And so I imagine, like with AI, and we're seeing a handful of companies kind of probe into the space now, you can further democratize it, right? Where you can ostensibly have a therapist in your pocket, just because AI makes it cheaper and more accessible, but without the loss of efficacy. Now, granted, there's a lot of tension right now, like using ChatGPT as a therapist. So maybe it does require what feels like a more verticalized approach, and maybe even a hybrid approach that leverages AI and a human in the loop. That's like a break glass
I've
if
seen some really cool
emergency,
companies doing that.
right?
Yeah.
But it's one example that says that, all right, this feels like a meaningful unlock that presents a step change in a way in which a product or a service, in this case therapy, can be delivered, and to whom does it become effective.
Or even like more personalized healthcare and insights, right? Like every individual person has very different needs, connecting doctors with therapists, and then I've heard of a couple companies that are just like doing that a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got okay, board certified people that now all of your data is now in the model and you're communicating and you have alerts that can go off to your physician and
Totally. And I think it does a lot to, again, reimagine how healthcare is delivered, which I argue has historically felt like emergency triage, where it's like, all right, something's wrong. How do I fix it? I think in the context of AI, being able to absorb different data signals, present what feels like a more comprehensive understanding of the individual, you can start to lean into something that feels entirely more proactive. Like before something is wrong, what are some triggers or some red flags or amber flags that I need to be aware of? And what proactive measures can I take in order to avoid those situations in a way that feels deeply unique and personalized to me as an individual versus me feeling kind of like a cog in a broader healthcare miasma.
yeah, unlocking memory.
Yeah.
All right, espresso questions. What's one view you hold about the market that most investors would disagree with?
Um, that AI is actually in a tough place.
Okay.
And the reason that I say that is because I mentioned earlier that I think the capabilities are far outpacing our adoption. I think people don't really recognize how long these things take, right? Like mobile payments, I think have 15 to 20% penetration or market share of payments. Amazon IPO'd more than a quarter century ago, and still only 20% of commerce happens online. Like people thought that it was going to ruin Walmart, and that's definitely not the case. Even with ChatGPT, I think it's only a third of Americans that have even touched it. And so I think people overestimate how quickly these
Gonna change the
technologies
world.
really change the world. I think we need to develop more of an appreciation around that. And I think what's unique about AI, especially when you compare it to other platform shifts, is that it's not really widely accepted emotionally.
Okay.
Like I think NBC released a survey, maybe even this morning, that surfaced that only like a quarter of respondents looked to AI favorably. Mobile, the open web, did not inspire the same level of anxiety or fear or apprehension that I think people, particularly those outside of tech circles,
Yeah.
are experiencing within the context of AI. And so, as much as I'm excited about the promise and the capabilities that AI can bring to the table, I do think that the thing that people are missing at this point is that it's still in a tough place, and we have a lot of work to do in order to make sure that it is received openly, and is kind of doing the work to up level people's lives and not make them worse.
Like outside of our little bubble in the venture world.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's one conviction you've completely rethought in the past year?
I used to think that everything kind of felt on aligned to some type of cost benefit analysis in a world where like there was always some type of cost. And so you had to really truly understand what the ROI of any activity was going to be. And I like use that framework for almost every dimension of life, whether it was work or personal, or whatever. It's like, all right, how much work is this going to take relative to the ROI that I expect from that activity? What's funny in the context of AI, and I hate to come back to AI, but it's relevant here, is that that curve looks phenomenally different. Where like it almost, and I was having this conversation with a founder not too long ago, but it's almost depressed the cost side of that consideration. Where it's like it's so easy to do things, and you're not strapped by like the resources, the time, and in some cases the money that certain things require. And so you can kind of just think about things in a just completely benefit only
Yeah.
world or context, which is kind of exciting, but also very daunting and scary. And also reinforces the idea of like, all right, damn, maybe we should focus on the things that truly move the needle because the cost isn't there in the same way.
Yeah, yeah. How many more consumer companies are you seeing now than you used to be seeing? Is it more or less?
I think it's more, but I think the lines are increasingly blurred between the notion of like B2C and B2B.
Okay.
What I'm finding is that in order to deliver value for consumers, it requires pretty interesting evolutions in like the technical infrastructure behind the scenes that some founders are able to leverage almost in a B2B fashion. And then you kind of create this flywheel where the ways in which you serve consumers reinforce context around what it takes to build successful infrastructure that you can then sell to other people. And it becomes like this compounding effect where you're able to benefit from both sides of the equation pretty meaningfully. And historically speaking, that was impossible to do because you needed to focus and you didn't have infinite time and resources. It's become a lot easier in the context of AI just because it's not that you're losing focus, it's just your ability to capture both opportunities simultaneously and make them both work for you and for each other feels entirely more outsized today than it did yesterday.
Like that. What's the risk most adventurous sleepwalking past right now?
Maybe that. Maybe that might be the answer.
It works. Who's a company, founder, or sector you're fascinated by at the moment, and why?
Not to sell my own book, but I have a founder in our portfolio by the name of Justin Silver, who was the founder of Kinetic, which is a AI native incubator based in Brooklyn, that I'm absolutely fascinated by. And it's largely because in many cases, he strikes me more as a philosopher than the prototypical founder.
Okay.
And why that's interesting is because I think what constitutes a successful founder these days has evolved pretty materially relative to a former generation. I think when I look back to like, let's call it the SaaS era, really successful founders were typically engineers or someone with outsized technical experience because the vector of innovation was what could they build that no one else could. Nowadays, in a universe where a lot of these technical capabilities are democratized, it requires one of two skill sets. One is being kind of an experienced operator within a particular discipline such that you're bringing a unique insight to the table that tells you what to build, how to build relative to the vertical or the category that you're looking to serve. Or you could call this like an AI architect who can almost understand how to orchestrate all of these disparate fragmented pieces and bring together all of these kind of components into a machine that just works. And so you're able to understand the dynamics of like human thought, human capability, be obviously super AI fluent.
Yeah.
Hence the AI architect, but like you're able to kind of just like cobble up all of these things, bring it together cohesively and turn that into a business.
Yeah.
And so it feels like a different setup than what's been successful before. And then Justin as like a philosopher, kind of just feels like an appropriate fit for that. Particularly given the nature of his business.
No, I mean, I
It's just
love
like
that.
it's an AI incubator. And so he's kind of called upon to do that during multiple times and multiple instantiations of it. And so, yeah, I'm just extraordinarily fascinated by him as a human.
Yeah, you're seeing more ideas and execution people versus I know how to build product.
Yeah.
What's a founder red flag that's actually a green flag for you?
It's having a really strong point of view, which for some folks can come across as hubris. And I think the difference is in the way in which it's presented. But I like people who have like a crystallized perspective that says, this is how the world is working and will work. But it's like strong opinions weakly held. Like I like the idea of a founder being able to nimbly flex as the need surfaces with new insights or new data points. But I like a founder who can appreciate a founder who has like a very, in some cases, divisive North Star.
Yeah.
Because if you were coming to the table with something that felt otherwise consensus, I just don't think it would just yield a really interesting outcome for anyone.
Do you try to knock them off their path and see how they handle it?
No, because that feels a little disingenuous and a little feisty. Um, but I do like the idea of intellectual debates, and not sparring per se, but I like to contextualize it as some form of truth seeking, where it's like, all right, like, hear me out. If I were to play devil's advocate, how would you kind of think about this? And I think in some cases that those types of mental battles can be really productive because then it just focuses and sharpens the point of view and perspective, if it's a founder who needs it. And I think going back to our board conversation, I think that's one of the more helpful exercises that you can have in a board context, where it's like it's not to say that I'm working to defeat your perspective as much as I'm looking to understand where's the truth in all of this and how can we collaboratively get to that destination in a way that, obviously feels happy and healthy.
Yeah, of course, of course. What do founders consistently get wrong about what VCs actually do?
Founders and my parents. I think my parents have no idea what the hell I do. Yeah, I think there's an assumption that we're just on the phone all day, which is not too far from the truth. I think one of my mentors kind of described venture as being the founder journey, but on antidepressants. And so the idea is that you're still on the same journey, but the amplitudes are depressed. Your highs aren't as high, your lows aren't as low, but you're still very emotionally and certainly intellectually attached to a broader universe of companies, not just one business, but a bunch. And it may be the case that some founders don't fully appreciate that investors are just as committed to some extent to their business. Obviously, it's not our baby,
Yeah.
but it's not to say that we don't want our baby to go to a good college and be successful. And so there is a level of commitment and attachment to the investments we make, especially if you are an investor that has a bit more of a concentrated portfolio where you're not just spraying capital, but really having considered and measured approach to your investing style.
Love it. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, man. Good to see you.
Appreciate you, dude.